Hi everybody, welcome to Northern Pride's Trans Awareness Week discussion panel. Tonight we're going to be exploring issues surrounding transgender diversity and the non-binary community. If you'd like to join the conversation, please be sure to stick your questions and comments in the live feed and we'll answer as many as we can throughout tonight's show. My name's Jay, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm here representing the LGBT Northern Social Group and B Trans Support and Community. I'd like to welcome the rest of our guests for tonight. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Gemma. Gemma uses she, her pronouns.
Hi there, I'm Gemma, use she, her pronouns, as Jay has just said, and I am one of the directors of B Trans Support and Community. And as a very brief introduction to what we do, we offer, as we say, support and community to trans people within the Northeast. So we offer one-to-one support sessions, as well as having a weekly peer support service, which would previously have been done in person, but as we'll no doubt touch on this evening, we can't currently do. And we do have other programs around health and wellbeing and so on, and campaigning for trans rights.
And next, I'd like to introduce Charlie.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I use he, him pronouns and I'm 19 years old.
Next, I'd like to introduce Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm 20. I use he, him pronouns and I work alongside Gemma and Jay with B as well.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce Arden.
Hello, I'm Arden. I volunteer at the Team Coffee Youth Group, which is run by Trinity Youth Association. And it's a group for young trans people to socialize once a week and do fun activities together. At the moment, it's all happening online, as I'm sure it'll also come up later. And my pronouns are they, them, and I'm non-binary.
So to get the conversation started now, we're all here. If we go back to what Arden just said, obviously COVID has had a massive impact on the trans community as a whole. So how has it been providing support for trans young people versus providing the support online?
Yeah, it's been a bit challenging. So what we've been doing is we used to have weekly in-person sessions. And now those have moved online to video chatting. And we do have a few more opportunities, like we can play online games, for example. But it's on the whole been really challenging because it's just not the same as being able to meet people in person. And then there's also a lot of tech issues, like people might not have amazing internet access. They might not have a laptop that they could use. So yeah, we've been trying really hard not to lose people and yeah, for people to drop off, but it's just been really difficult on the whole. Yeah, does anyone else have some experience with this? Gemma, maybe you and the B group, have you had similar experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So we ran a weekly face-to-face session as well, peer support for. The numbers varied in the groups, but on a good week, we would have up to, approaching 30 people would turn up. And on the digital side of things, now that we're doing weekly calls via Zoom, we might get maybe 9, 10 on a good week. So you're seeing a real drop off, and it's kind of hard to keep contact with people that we can only engage with face to face. We have certain people, as you've said, who maybe aren't necessarily tech savvy, don't have the equipment, or have other barriers to getting involved with virtual services. So it's really putting a block on our ability to help people and to help people feel connected to their community.
Charlie, what would you say, as obviously a trans person being around, obviously COVID, like everybody else has had to be, would you say that the community are suffering a sense of not being able to have a safe place to express themselves? And is that something that you notice, the lack of engagement that you're able to have with groups like B and Trinity Youth to be able to engage in the community?
I think so, yeah. It's definitely, it has affected how I'm able to sort of communicate with those groups. I've attended the B Zoom sessions a couple of times, but I don't do great with like over the phone type stuff. So I haven't gone as much as I'd like to. But overall, yeah, I think there has been a difference in the ability to get support, because not everybody has access to like the internet, the cameras, and stuff like that to be able to attend online sessions.
Yeah, I know, Matthew, I know that you've run a B session or two, obviously, since the lockdown has started. And do you feel like going back to in-person sessions, like regarding with the trans community, it's going to have the same engagement, or do you feel like there's a lot of work to do to re-engage the trans community and to be as strong as we were before lockdown, or do you feel that we're still as strong as we used to be before?
I feel like maybe it will be a bit of a challenge to re-engage people. I mean, obviously, as been mentioned before, there's been like the challenges of not having strong internet connectivity and stuff like that. And I think re-engaging once it's safe to do so again, in the regards that we'll probably get more people back. It will be easier in that sense, but hard that we might kind of feel a bit out of the loop of everything going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know obviously with COVID as well, like as most trans people will know about and be able to relate to, that the NHS waiting lists and private care waiting lists have obviously changed a lot due to not being able to get appointments and people getting surgery cancelled and stuff. How long do you think it's going to be before the things are back up and running and we're able to carry on with the journey of medical transition, if that's what people choose to do so?
Could be a while.
I think it's very hard to. Sorry.
Oh, go on, Gemma.
I think it's very hard to try and put any sort of estimate on it, because obviously we don't know when things are going to get back to any sort of normality just in society in general. And then obviously there is going to be a delay after that for the gender services to get back up to speed. And that, I mean, to be honest, I'm saying a delay for them to get back up to speed, but even that is optimistic. With the current setup for gender services, I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but the numbers were rising and rising anyway. The pandemic has only made that worse, and there's nothing to suggest that when the society goes back to normal, that the gender service will then all of a sudden speed up and start getting ahead of the increases on the waiting lists. I mean, it's really short of a major shake-up, and there are trials in the offing. Short of that sort of major shake-up and a serious investment in the gender services, you probably aren't really going to see an improvement. I mean, we've gotten to the point now. We've got to the point now, I'm sorry to dominate, where even the private services are now showing like massive lead times, and private services are turning people away because they have massive wait times that they can't deal with. When you're in that situation, there is something seriously wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Would you say about like the impact on mental health with trans people as well? Obviously, COVID's making people very isolated, and some people have been shielding since the beginning of March. So that's months on end without much social interaction, at the same time as having to deal with the gender dysphoria that they may feel by themselves. Would you say that COVID's had a very negative impact on mental health and trans well-being?
Should I go again? Yeah,
go ahead.
For sure. I mean, absolutely. Everyone, I mean, and it is almost everybody is feeling this, aren't they? I mean, whether you're someone who is, you know, in the throes of, you know, questioning your identity, going through early transition, whether you're out the other side, isolation is still tough either way. But for the people who are still going through the worst of dysphoria and dealing with transition or questioning their identity, it's just incredibly difficult, because for some they're in a situation where they may be in a home situation where they can't really express themselves, and being able to get outside was their way of doing that, and that's been taken away. Or just that you don't have the social life that you had before, and so what that can do is sort of channel your focus on this one issue, where we encourage people to think of their gender concerns as just one part of their life, and yes, that needs attention, but don't forget about everything else that you've got going on. This sort of situation makes that a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, during COVID and during the lockdown, obviously something most trans people will be aware of was about the Gender Recognition Act reform being announced. And obviously there were a few changes, such as 3 new gender clinics opening and making the process of getting a GRC a little bit cheaper. But obviously there was a lot missed, and there was a lot of trans people who felt slightly disheartened by the outcome. And I know that one of the big things about that was non-binary recognition, and the fact that in the UK, non-binary people still don't have legal recognition. For example, can't be married as who they are. They can't. There's a lot of things that they can't do. That off the top of my head, there's so many. But I was wondering, Arden, how you feel about that, because obviously being a non-binary person yourself, it must be really frustrating, the fact that this has been announced in a time where there's not much you can do about it, and there's, you know, it's hard to talk to people, and it's hard to be able to have your voice listened to because the full world's locked down at the moment.
Yeah, I think you said it really good at the end there. To be perfectly honest, the announcement of the Gender Recognition Act, I do remember it now, but it's barely been in my memory just because so much has been going on. So definitely feels like it's a topic that's been, I mean, it's been delayed and delayed, and now because of COVID, it's, you know, for understandable reasons, been pushed to the sidelines. But I do find it incredibly challenging. And so my personal situation is that I'm a German citizen, and Germany does have a non-binary slash diverse slash genderqueer slash intersex gender marker. And so I do have that in my passport, but it's not being recognized in the UK. And I've had, yeah, several issues with having my records updated because the fact that I had changed this in another country wasn't accepted, and then the fact that I had changed it to a non-binary marker, and me being transmasculine would also then, I'd be like, okay, fine, if you want to put it down as well. I don't like it, but that's a compromise. But even then, some services have refused to do that. So that's really frustrating. And again, going back to this other perspective I have about Germany, it's really bizarre to me because in Germany the general population is much less aware of trans identities, and specifically non-binary identities in Germany are very invisible even within its queer community. So being in the UK is this double-edged sword where I feel like I have to explain myself slightly less, and I have found some unexpected acceptance. But then at the same time, this like more awareness and more acceptance is not at all reflected in legal issues, and that's what makes it like especially disheartening. It's like it's very well known that non-binary people exist. We are very clear about the things that we want, which is legal recognition, legal rights. It's really not hard. And then the fact that that is completely ignored hurts much worse than in a country where there's just less awareness for it, which still sucks. But yeah, this just feels like a slap in the face.
I know as part of the Gender Recognition Act, it obviously got a lot of media attention surrounding various different viewpoints on how trans people should be identified and things like that. And obviously the media for the past couple of years has been a massive standpoint in some people finding out that trans people, you know, don't have legal recognition, or the fact that trans people simply exist alongside them. It was such a taboo topic until the media started to pick it up. And obviously there's a double-edged sword with that, because we want recognition of who we are and we want to be seen and represented in media, but it's also the negativity that comes with it. Would you say that lockdown, relating back to the GRA and COVID, has made a spike in online hate crime? Or would you say that it's always been there and maybe just people are starting to be more aware of it because they're on the phones more with being in lockdown and seeing it more?
I'd like to say something to that because I was just thinking about this before the panel started. So I think it's always been there. But yeah, the being online more and beings, like both people who harass people online are online more and posting more. And then, of course, us passing the time at home, I would imagine, are also online more. But what makes like an additional component with the lack of, being able to meet face to face, having your social circle, and all that, like kind of has like created this imbalance where I feel like I am subjected more to negative messages, be it from like randos on Twitter, or even just, I don't know, The Guardian posting an article that is just thinly veiled transphobia. So yeah, just being subjected to online hate and discrimination at a time where you can't fall back to meeting your trans social network in person makes this hit harder.
Yeah, definitely. And Matthew, do you have any advice on dealing with transphobia in person or online? But obviously at the moment it's mostly online, but in terms like mental well-being, in terms of knowing how to handle a situation, do you have any advice that you would give to other trans people in that situation?
Yeah, definitely adding on to what Arden, what they were saying, it's a kind of a little bit to go back to the original question. It's a bit of both of that. It's a lot of people have a lot of time now, so anyone who makes the transphobic comments often finding themselves online a lot more, and almost some of them searching for this. But in terms of dealing with the transphobia that you're getting, whether that's in person or online, my personal approach with it is to just kind of ignore it and not so much let it slide, in the sense that, we need to accept that this is going to happen, but it's more of try your best to not let it affect you, because the people who are important in your life, they wouldn't be targeting transphobia at you. And so if you let it slide from someone random who's insignificant to your life and who doesn't know you, then you kind of generally find your outlook gets a little bit easier and a lot more positive, because you're not focusing on all the negativity.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And going back into media, Charlie, I don't know if you have any views on this. There's been debate in the media a lot recently about like cisgender people who are non-trans playing trans characters in TV and film and things like that. And also, it seems that people want to make sure that trans actors and trans creatives have equal opportunity to cisgender people, and that the experience of these people isn't wiped out. Is there anything that you have an opinion on regarding this?
Ideally, it would be best to have trans actors play trans roles, but I understand that that's not always easy. Obviously, the best possible thing to do to get like accurate representation would be to have trans actors. But I think if a non-trans actor is cast as a trans role, to make it a bit more representative and easier, it would be best to like work with trans people if that's possible.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. And obviously, we've got Trans Day of Remembrance coming up. And one thing about this argument that people say is portraying a trans woman in a film as this beautifully feminine person, and they accept an award for playing in that film, and they're wearing a suit and have a full beard and is everything opposite to the character they've played. Says it adds into the narrative of people's minds that, like trans women may just be like men in dresses, which obviously we know isn't true. But to an outside perspective, we know and we hear it a lot that this is sadly the opinion a lot of people hold. Gemma, would you agree with that and say that that's something that does add into the narrative of like violence taking place against trans people?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the wider statement about it, in terms of, you see these award shows and you've got very high profile actors, male actors usually playing trans women, who then lean into the opposite when they're on stage. It's because those films are very much targeted to be Oscar bait, because we know what gets those sort of awards, which is some sort of like going through a trial as an actor, and it's seen as some horrendous thing that no one would want to ever do. You know, oh God, you're going to play a woman on screen. That's so embarrassing and so awful. What an ordeal for you. You must have really put your heart and soul into playing this role. Meanwhile, we know that we've got so many fantastic trans women and other trans actors out there who could be playing those roles. And I think there is a show called Disclosure on Netflix, which if people haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend that they watch, which talks about the history of trans portrayal in TV and film. And it's very much shows that even when they do work with trans people, cis actors just won't get the trans experience. You can't unless you've lived it. And so they pick up and emphasize the wrong things, which then signals to the wider populace, as you say, that we are just a performance and it's not real, which again plays into the narrative of trans people being fake and out to trick people, and that's where you get the sort of trans panic crimes and the attempted defences that we see in certainly in America is probably the worst place for it. So I think it's all just part of one big awful situation. I mean, separating the cause from the effect is very difficult. I think it all just plays in together.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've worded that really well as well, I would say. But we've got a question from the audience now, which should pop up at the bottom of the screen, I believe. Where do you think intersex people fit within the conversation? So we'll presume fit within the conversation of trans awareness as well. I don't know if anybody feels confident to speak on the topic, but I know myself, I am an intersex person, which I found out about a year and a half ago now. And it was something quite like coming to terms with, because I'd used the label trans for myself from being very young, and then suddenly finding out that I'm intersex. But for me, finding out that the two labels could coexist together and being able to know that although I am intersex, I am also trans, and not separating the two, for me was really helpful in working out where I stand and who I am. And it made a lot of my past make sense. So I personally think that intersex people do fit within the conversation when intersex people do feel comfortable and confident identifying with trans narratives and trans people, and identify themselves as part of the trans community. In the trans community, have always been very loving and supportive to the fact I am intersex, although I didn't know it at the time, but now I do, and it's met with a lot of love and acceptance. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to the topic of where intersex people fit within the conversation.
Yeah, I'd like to say something real quick. I'm sorry, there's an ambulance going past. Okay, it's mostly gone. Sorry about that. Right. So what I wanted to say, something that I mentioned earlier, that the gender marker that I have in my passport in Germany is also intended for intersex people if they want it, because intersex people are not automatically non-binary. They might be men or women. But yeah, I'm very conscious of the fact that the reason this marker exists is because an intersex person brought their legal case all the way up to the equivalent of the German Supreme Court and fought that battle. And I'm incredibly thankful to then be able to, partake in what they fought for. And I do feel like, I hope that we can make more space for intersex people in the queer community if they want it. And that we need to include them in our struggle for recognition and rights, because there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of because at the end of the day, what trans people want is like the right to self-determination, and that should be given to intersex people as well, who can also be trans. Because thank you for saying that, Jay. Oh, Jay, I think you're muted.
There we go, sorry. I think the medicalisation of intersex people is definitely worth mentioning, because in a lot of countries, obviously non-consensual surgery is performed, and also topics such as medicalisation of intersex people is completely disregarded and seen as a taboo topic. And you hear the stories all the time within the media, which is obviously another portrayal of, LGBT and trans and intersex identities within the media. So would anybody say that they've seen like a positive increase in intersex stories within the past couple of years? Because I've noticed within the past couple of months, I feel that with like certain like companies such as Pink News like talking more about intersex and intersexuality, that it seems to be less of a taboo topic. Does anybody else feel the same?
I feel like there's definitely been a rise in a lot more representation surrounding it. It's probably also worth noting that intersex people and trans people, there's obviously an overlap in the labels, but it depends on the person. I found that quite a lot of people so someone who identifies with trans may not see intersex as something that overlaps, whereas someone like Jay, for example, do see that there's an overlap. But it's definitely, in terms of answering the original question, where do they fit into the narrative? It's down to the individual, I think. I mean, I myself, I'm not intersex, but I've definitely seen a lot of intersex people talking about the topic and how it fits into trans narratives. I'm trying to remember the name of someone. I think they were called Pigeon, and they were American, and they use intersex as their main label. But also they identify with androgyny. And so that's quite a positive representation of someone who's intersex, and like talking about their experiences with it. And I think they've definitely gained a lot of popularity recently as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, recently, last month we had Intersex Day of Remembrance. Obviously, we have Trans Day of Remembrance coming up this month, and the two are obviously very interlinked with each other. So going back where we briefly touched on the topic of Trans Day of Remembrance, Charlie, would you like to say like a couple of thoughts of like why you think Trans Day of Remembrance is celebrated by the community in a sense? If celebrate is the word that some people would feel comfortable using, and the importance of celebrating it with the community.
It's a way of acknowledging everybody who has gone through some sort of hate crime that led to them unfortunately dying. It's a way to celebrate their existence and to just be aware truly of how many people go through this. It's like there was 300 or so names last year just for that year of the amount of trans and non-binary people who were killed. And it's a way to just come together as a community and acknowledge that these lives have been taken and that something needs to be done about that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, Gemma B is involved in organising Trans Day of Remembrance every year, and obviously that's online this year as well. But I feel myself personally that it's a very important day for the community to be able to come together and mourn. But obviously there's a lot of, when the names are read out at the event, a lot of the people on the list are trans women of colour who are sex workers predominantly. Do you have an explanation as to why that might be and why it's so important to make sure that we're having discussions around how Black trans women are a minority even within a minority community?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something where we have to be very, very careful. And I always try and preach this whenever I talk about Trans Day of Remembrance, is to avoid appropriating, because as a white European trans woman, I am in no way in anywhere near the kind of danger as many, as you say, Black trans women, particularly in Americas, whether that's the USA or especially South America, Brazil, Ecuador, Argentina are particularly dangerous areas. Yeah, we have to make sure that we don't appropriate these people in terms of the danger that they're exposed to. Yes, I think a lot of that is because they are sex workers. And so then that gets into the reasons, both why is that dangerous and why are they in that position? And I think certainly with a lot of that's transphobia, it's sexism, and it's the fact that a lot of routes are closed to trans people. So within places like Brazil, the chances of a trans woman just getting a standard 9-to-5 job and being out of that dangerous situation is almost impossible. So that throws them straight into a dangerous lifestyle. Yes, sex work is a perfectly valid choice if it's a free choice, but if you are left with that as no other option, and it's a very dangerous avenue of work in that particular part of the world, that is obviously a problem. And then in terms of, the Black community, we obviously see an issue with homophobia and transphobia within the Black community that is probably slightly disproportionate. And I know that's something that, people who are far better positioned than me to point this out have said. People like, Billy Porter in America, who said, you can't be shouting Black Lives Matter when Black trans lives don't matter. So, again, I don't want to appropriate, but it is a very, very important conversation to be having.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously we are best placed, as Gemma said, but there is obviously Black Pride UK, who are a great charity and UK based, who is probably worth mentioning as part of the discussion, where they give out great information and they have great advocates to be able to voice these things. So I appreciate, thank you, Gemma, for answering that. I do appreciate it was a hard question to be thrown with. There's been a question in the comments which I think would be really good for Matt to answer. Which is, how can friends and family support a trans person struggling with gender clinic waiting lists? Is there anything that is unhelpful?
So obviously friends and family, obviously being trans is a very unique experience you can have as a person. And it's something that I personally feel not very many people are going to understand unless you experience it yourself. And that's very difficult for friends and family, as I know from my own family and from my partner Charlie's family. There's often, they can sympathize with it and they can try their best to support, but ultimately they're never going to really understand it. And that's something that's they find very difficult. And it's just reinforcing that, like, friends and family reinforcing their support for you and trying to understand like the amount of hardship you go through with the waiting list, because they are astronomically long and it is incredibly difficult to get through that and feel 100% with it. And I think something that's very unhelpful I found with my own family is statements like, well, why can't you just be happy as you are now? Why can't you just learn to love yourself? And as absolutely no disrespect to my family and in them saying that, but it's a very hard question to ask, because my answer to that would be, if I could just love myself as I would, taking the route of going down position, if I could just love myself as I am. And I think statements like that are incredibly unhelpful, and I'm sure Charlie can understand that as well, because we've had these conversations with his family as well.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, from your point of view as well, like, we've been talking about the unhelpful parts, but like, from a perspective, what would you say is helpful? Like, what would you say is like the ideal outcome, if there is one, for an individual?
Well, with the NHS waiting times, it's continuously just increasing, which is very difficult on everybody who's on that wait list. But if possible, there is private options. I know that's not possible for everyone. It does cost a lot of money, but private clinics have actually helped me during this time. So they are able to give as much help as they can if you're able to go down that route, and hopefully, usually things go faster with them if you're able to.
Yeah, that sounds like really good advice as well. I mean, Gemma, from your perspective, obviously working with B and supporting in like a peer setting, is there any advice that you give to people that are on waiting lists, where if somebody comes to you, because I know that I had the conversation with you before I started testosterone and was lucky enough to be able to get the healthcare I needed, about just feeling completely overwhelmed and thinking like it's so far away that it's such a long wait. Like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to be? Like, especially as I was lucky to be quite young when I came out. But what's the general consensus of what you give? I know that's very broad because everyone's so individual, but
it's very difficult, and when someone is going through it, obviously it's hard to hear some of the advice that you're going to be given, and it's very easy again for someone who has been out the other side to say this, because I know when I was through the thick of it, I wouldn't have taken it well. But the best thing that you can do is try not to stress too much about how long it's taking, because it will happen eventually. And all the sort of doom and gloom about, you know, it's forever, and, you know, I'm going to be poisoned by the wrong hormones, and, you know, it's going to destroy my chances of ever looking or being the way that I want to. It's overblown. I honestly believe it's overblown. And so people can very much catastrophize and put themselves into this mindset of, it has to be now, otherwise I'm going to be failing massively. And that's just a level of pressure that you don't need. You need to be able to confide in people. So if you've got friends and family that you can talk to, great. If not, then that's what people like that we're here for. So you need to be able to talk and get your concerns off your chest. It's just, try not to stress and try not to make your entire life about that transition, because it will just magnify all of these problems that you're going through. Remember that you've got everything else going on in your life, and you can do a lot without the help of the gender services. You know, there is a lot that you can do. Really, the gender clinic, they can help talk you through certain concerns you might have, and they can issue you with prescriptions, and they can put you forward for surgery, hair removal, voice therapy. But really, there is a heck of a lot that you can do yourself. And so find a mentor, find a trans mentor who can talk you through those things.
yeah, I mean, from Arden, your perspective, obviously you work with trans young people, and I know Trinity Youth sometimes goes below the age of 16 and 16 to 25 as well. So you're dealing with younger people than Gemma might be dealing with on a weekly basis. Is there any sort of different advice that you give to when they're feeling distressed about the waiting list? Obviously, the Tavistock Children's Clinic has a very long waiting list and a very long process as well.
Yeah, it's difficult because there's really not much you can do or say that'll make someone feel significantly better, because the only thing that would make them feel better is to finally get an appointment. So what is very important is to not minimize the hurt someone is going through, and not be like, oh, come on, like saying things like, oh, you've waited so long, you can wait a little longer, or, oh, it's not so bad, or, you know, maybe you can do something else in the waiting time. So I think it's really important to take someone seriously. Someone already said, I forgot who, that it's very important to, if someone wants to talk about it, if someone wants to be like, yeah, I want to talk about how much this is on my mind, to let them and listen to them. At the same time, and I realize this is a really difficult balance to walk, is to not let it devolve into a shared commiseration and like spiraling basically together over how long everything takes. So I think, yeah, making time to talk about it if it's in someone's mind. Also knowing that you're not the only one can both help but also be depressing. And I think what's then really important, and something that we do in group as well, is that if we do talk about heavy topics, to also follow it up either with the discussion about something lighter to take people's minds off it, or to do an activity together that is fun, distracting, so you're not left in that mindset of catastrophizing, like Gemma put it really well. Yeah, that would be my advice.
I mean, obviously working with youth as well, you'll get a lot of like young people who haven't came out yet and are trying to find ways to come out to families, but also bearing in mind that these sometimes are people under the age of 16 where they can't just be able to set themselves up safely and be able to have places to go and things like that. So what advice would you give to like a young trans person who is trying to find a safe way to come out?
Yeah, that's really tricky, and I have limited experience because I didn't come out to myself until I was 20. But yeah, from what I know from young trans people is that like the internet is a great resource. I think there's a lot of also age appropriate advice on the internet that you can find. You know, be mindful, be smart about it, and like, and if it's possible, to, it always depends on like how your parents are, and you will know your parents best. So like definitely like trust your own instincts. If you have the impression that maybe your parents would be open to like a general queer group, if you're not confident that they would accept trans immediately, or that they would like ask too many questions, maybe to be able to then attend a youth group that is like generally for the LGBT community, and be able to get help that way. What might also be possible is if you know if your school has a school counselor who is open to this, yeah, to try and find an adult that you can trust who has the right information, and if they can like help you further. Obviously, it's an incredibly tricky situation, and if you have the impression that coming out to your parents or your wider family would not go over well, to trust your instincts, don't let yourself be pressured. And yeah, like the important thing is that like you're still you're still trans, and one day you will be able to do what you want to do, and your parents can't tell you no. And I think that's important to hold on to.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's worth mentioning here as well. Another resource, obviously, for parents of young people, Mermaids is a really good resource and has a lot of information there. So that's a good place to look if you need. But also, we've got another question from the audience now, which will come up on the screen. Have you found that there is a stereotype that trans people cannot identify as a man/woman and also non-binary? I don't know. Does anyone want to take this?
Yeah, let me, since I'm the resident non-binary person, I suppose. There's definitely, I feel, apprehension within trans people themselves. So this is usually something that comes up in like private discussions, because you don't want to talk about this where people can see, because I think there's a fear that, yeah, that there will be a misunderstanding. Because my impression is that kind of very clueless cis people already think that binary trans people, so trans people who identify and are women or men, that they are kind of this in-between thing. I feel like it's a bit outdated by now, thankfully. And then that makes it all the harder to be like, hey, I'm trans, but I am non-binary, but not in the way you think non-binary works. And then if you have someone who identifies along the gender spectrum, because it is a spectrum, and says, I fall more on the feminine side, but I'm not 100% a woman, or, you know, however they want to put it into their words, that there, I think, is a fear to, you know, that you accidentally invalidate your identity, or that you might have more trouble accessing treatment. I don't know how much stereotyping there is from like the mainstream, or yeah, the cisgender mainstream, because I feel like a lot of specifically transphobia isn't even too concerned with individual identities, because they want to tar everything with the same brush. But nevertheless, to close this off, is that I feel like there's just a lot of fear within people themselves, that they have to have things figured out, and that they have to have a perfectly explainable, valid identity. And yeah, to close it off, I think it's absolutely possible to be a woman or a man and non-binary, because all configurations are fine, and however you want to phrase it, that's the right way for you to do.
Yeah, I think that sums it up very well. So if we go on to obviously the topic of, you mentioned about like the way that people perceive, and we're talking about stereotypes in terms of being an ally, with this one to Charlie, how would you say that like organizations, events, companies, anything can be inclusive to trans people and make sure that they're showing allyship to the trans community?
maybe just like expressing awareness that like for example, if it's like a company making awareness that there will be like trans customers, for example, and try to educate the employees that there's, if you see someone who you think may be trans, you know, like don't make a comment on it, just treat them as anybody else, because I've seen some things where employees have said some rude comments to a person they've deemed as trans, and like bad stuff has happened as a result of that. I think it would just be best to try and do the best to make everybody aware and give education for like employees or whatever, stuff like that. And just try to be a kind person and don't treat trans people differently than you would from a cis person.
Yeah, I think that sums it up well. It's mostly all about basic respect, isn't it? Like when a trans person walks in, if you think they're trans, you don't have to say it, sort of thing, which I know seems like such common sense to us because it's our everyday lives, but to some people it's nice to be able to give the reminder on what allyship means and how to be an ally to people. So if we go on to a little bit about like personal experience, because we've talked about like safe ways of coming out, we've talked about COVID and lockdown, and we've talked as a trans community as a whole. But if anybody would be comfortable answering questions about like personal experiences, I think that could obviously like really help educate people. So if I start with myself in an oversharing way to like open the group up, I came out trans around the age of 16. And the first person I came out to was my mum, in a very weird way of watching Jeremy Kyle. And I turned to her and said, if I was a boy, what name do you think I would suit? And she said, why? Oh, yeah. And I said, yeah. And then she went to bed and we talked about it the next day. So has anyone else got like a coming out story that they would like to share?
I'm just trying to think which one would be the best. Quite a few.
Yeah, you've got to come out, obviously, like as some people may know, you've got to come out to so many different people, and sometimes every day. Like even I've been on testosterone a year and I'm 21 now, and I still come out majority of days. I've got to tell somebody new I'm trans, and obviously being so openly and publicly trans opens yourself to people feeling like they've got a right to know as well. So that obviously brings a whole other ball game into it. Arden, do you have a coming out story?
Yeah, one just occurred to me. It was when I came out at work. Sorry about the cars. And I basically so working in an office, and I wrote this long. No, it wasn't a long email. It was a short email. It was just, hello everyone. I'm trans and I have a new name. I have new pronouns, and then a little image of a trans pride heart. And like, yeah, it was really short. And the thing that happened was that obviously a lot of people were very positive. But what I find really interesting is that, so this was back in Germany, and people would come up to me and congratulate me. And the customary way in Germany to congratulate someone for their birthday is to shake their hand and say happy birthday. So people came up to me and shook my hand and were like, congratulations, as if it was my birthday. I was like, this is not really what I expected, and I don't really think that this is like common etiquette. I think everyone just kind of defaulted to the, oh, what do you do with this occasion? I don't know. Well, I guess you go up to someone and congratulate them with a handshake. Yeah, I thought that was really lovely. Jay, you're muted again.
Sorry, it's on mute when people are talking. I'll get used to it. We've got a question in the comments asking about a specific GP who can help with top surgery. Do you know of any surgeons up the northeast of England who accept surgery referral letter from Gender GP, please? Obviously, it's not something we can give great information about, but if you have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, for the most part, surgeons will, take on the referral at a private cost, or if you went through the NHS gender clinic, they can give referrals directly to an NHS surgeon. So it's a case of trying to find the information about the private surgeon of your choice who you would like to do the surgery, and or waiting for the Northern Region Gender Dysphoria Service to give you the referral. If you would like more information, I'm sure B wouldn't mind being contacted, and we can send a link to the dictionary of surgeons that is found online. I'll personally get that for you if that would be of help. So I hope that's answered the question, unless anyone else has something to add to it. No?
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Cool. So if we quickly go back to obviously the personal information stories, anybody else have a coming out story they would like to share?
I have one from college.
I'm ready. The face of like, made us feel excited to hear it.
So there's kind of like two parts to it. So I socially transitioned in the summer break between my first and second year of college. So right at the end of the last term of the first year of college, I cut my hair short and started coming out more publicly to everyone. But in my college, throughout, my friends knew about, despite not outwardly presenting myself as male. And during a study session where we were allowed to go into the classrooms over the half term, two of my friends were sat waiting for me in the classroom, and our teacher had come in and was like, "Oh, hi, what are you doing here?" And they were like, "Oh, we're just waiting for Matthew." And my teacher didn't know me as Matthew at that point. And they kind of like panicked a little bit, and they did out me, and they did tell me about it afterwards, and they apologized, and they realized that they shouldn't have done it like that. But I didn't know that they'd accidentally outed me to my teacher until I went to go and come out to her when I cut my hair short. And she was like, "Oh yeah, I kind of already knew." And I was like, "Oh, well, that makes this so much easier for me." And then coming out to my other A-level teacher was for some reason really, really terrifying. But the teacher who'd known the whole time kind of pushed me towards doing it. And then when I came out to my other teacher, I kind of thought, well, why did I feel like this was such a big issue? And we laughed about it afterwards. But it was funny to find that the teacher already knew pretty much the entire time, and it took half the job off of me for quite a while.
We've got another question from the audience that's just came in to be able to respond to. Have you dealt with feelings of jealousy over other people's transitions? How can you manage / cope with this? I don't know, Charlie, is this one you want to take?
Yeah. I can admit I have been jealous seeing other people get further in their transition than me, because I'm just pre everything as of right now. I'm not really sure how to cope with it, honestly. I mainly just try and ignore it, because I have to understand that there will be a point where I get on testosterone, I have top surgery. It's just playing a waiting game. It's never going to happen immediately when you want it to. You're going to have to wait. It's something that you just kind of have to deal with. But just know that you will get there. You will transition. You will get on hormones, all those surgeries you want. It's just a long time to wait.
Yeah, I think trans jealousy, especially, like, it's sometimes something that you can't help when you see other people being where you want to be, but it's also about making sure that you're processing it in a healthy way and you're still able to be happy for other people. I mean, Gemma, is this something that you come across with B? Obviously having trans people in a similar scenario altogether. And do you think like peer support helps other people be more happy for each other than jealous of each other?
I think it does, because obviously it depends on what you mean by jealousy as well. Is it just jealousy that someone is further ahead than you in the process? Or is it jealousy about how they look, how they present themselves? You know, there's a lot of different aspects that you can put to it. I think with the timing one, it's very much just trying to say to people, and it is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's true. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and you will get there. Having patience, although it's not easy at the time, it's super, super important to just keep yourself on an even keel and know that eventually you will get to where you're going. And in terms of everything else, yeah, I mean, it's easy enough to just look at a picture of someone or read an account and say, oh, they're where I want to be. It's not fair. But when you get to know them, if it's a person who's, you know, in your circles and you can speak to them and you find out everything that they've gone through to get to that point, then you can be much more sort of invested in the person, happy for them. And of course, they can then support you through your journey. So yeah, I think peer support is fantastic for that. Absolutely.
I think obviously peer support's like a big part of being able to express yourself and things like that, and within that may come jealousy, but I think the support aspect's really important. I mean, Arden, do you come across that with the young people, that they find it more helpful to have each other around and be able to have people that can relate to?
I think definitely that's like, yeah, that's what it's there for. Especially what's amazing about peer support, and especially for younger people, is that it's also a way to make friends in your own age group, who are also trans, and um, that's really valuable. I actually was a member of the youth group myself before I aged out of it and became a volunteer, and I've made friends myself there, and I feel like, especially with young trans people, that's super helpful, because especially, I don't know, if you're shy and if you're unsure about this, and like, I guess if I had been that age, I might not have had a lot of friends. So exactly that kind of thing would have been really helpful. And like, yeah, I see a lot of friendships being made in the group, which is just very heartwarming.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky, especially I know of the Northeast, but the trans community in general, very lucky to have such like a close knit and like community that's so willing to help each other. And I think that's the great thing about the trans community, although we're all so unique and also different, and there's only one thing that we all have in common, that is still a completely different scenario. It's still a community that's very much full of love. And I think that's something that makes me really proud to be trans, the fact that there is a lovely community. And just because I've been talking about like a little bit of heavier topics, I thought it might be nice if we could all say like something that makes us proud to be trans, and you know why we feel so passionate, like putting ourselves out here today to be able to do a panel for trans awareness and stuff like that. So Gemma, would you mind starting?
Yeah, sure. I think you've really given a very good summary there. The community is fantastic. Yeah, we have our conflicts and we have our disagreements, but for the most part, we all pull together and we work for each other. And it's just seeing people in the trans community are, most of the time, they are people who have gone through this real sort of path of self-discovery. And it takes a time to get there, but when someone comes at the other side, what you see is someone who has really grown and blossomed and kind of flourished into the person that they really want to be. And yeah, we have barriers, but people can really reach this sort of potential that a lot of other people don't get, because they don't sort of have that self-introspection. And so what you get with trans people is this sort of level of authenticity, which is just fantastic, just brilliant. So yeah, I just really like seeing people coming out of these shells and just really becoming themselves. So rewarding in what we do to see that sort of development in people over and over again.
Yeah, I think I can tell by the smile on your face that it's definitely something you're proud of, which obviously great to see. Matthew, do you have like a reason that you'd like to share that makes you proud to be trans?
I think being trans and part of the trans community, while I have my own internal conflicts with it, I always kind of come out, like every time I have the argument with myself in my head, like, am I really proud or am I not? I always come out with the answer that I am proud, because it's taught me a lot about myself, and not to sound cliche, but it really has taught me about myself, and it's definitely taught me a lot of patience, for myself and for others. And I don't think I'd have been as open-minded as I am had I not been trans and had I not had this experience. So I'm quite grateful for the experience it's given me.
Yeah, what about you, Charlie? Is there anything that you would like to add about what makes you proud to be trans?
Through being trans and discovering myself, I've managed to make a lot of friends. Like going to these to the groups like B, I've managed to find more people like me, whereas before I didn't know anyone. I was the only trans person that I knew of, and I've managed to meet so many new people and make new friends, and it's just been great, and it's definitely helped a lot coming to terms with who I am.
And lastly, Arden, what makes you proud to be trans and non-binary?
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a weird one because I sometimes think that if it wasn't for a community finding and researching things online, it's possible that I might never have found out that I'm non-binary and would have a completely different life. But thinking about it, it's like, no, I'm very happy that I know this about myself. I'm so glad that I can put a name to it and that there's so many fantastic people around. And if I wasn't non-binary at all, I would have other things to worry about with how to do it. So I try really not to focus too much on that side. And I think it's really cool also because trans people have the best memes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do another positive light one just before we start to wrap it up. If you could give advice to a trans person watching this who is in a position where you were when you first realized that you were trans, what advice would you give them? Because I know, like, for me personally, my advice to myself that I always say, it would be, you can tell your mom and she's not going to hate you and everything's going to be fine. And, you may not have thought that you would get this far, but you are 21 and you're happy and you're healthy and you're in a place where you never thought you would be. And I think that advice would have been really valuable for myself if I knew that when I was 15. So as like a final question before I wrap up, what advice would you have given your past self? Does Gemma want to start? She'll go in that order again.
Okay, yeah, I can go. I'm a little bit older than the rest of you, so when I was going through it in the very, very early stages, I went through a period of questioning and then decided that it wasn't going to work, and I buried everything for another 10 years. And I think at that point, what I needed to hear was that I wasn't alone. There were a heck of a lot of other trans people out there. The community wasn't where it is now, but it did exist. And I think it's a cliche, but yeah, that you're not alone, and that whatever barriers that you can put up in your own mind, whether that's family, friends, your own physical appearance, and whether you think that it's possible to transition with what you're starting from, whatever it is, those barriers are all things that you can overcome. And to eventually sort of be true to yourself and have a life where you are, going back to that word I said before, you're authentic and you are giving the world who you really are, it's worth every one of those fights that you have to get through those barriers. Absolutely. And you can get there.
Matthew, would you like to say yours?
Again, not to sound cliche, but it does get easier, and I wish I could have told myself that when I was younger. And definitely the experience of being trans helps you kind of see who is really there for you in your life, and it, like Gemma said, it's absolutely worth all the fights that you have to put yourself through and that you go through as a trans person. So definitely the message of it gets easier.
Charlie, would you like to say yours?
Yeah. It's okay to question yourself. You're not the only one who does. There's millions of other people exactly like you. There's always going to be a support system when you find those people, and you'll learn so much about yourself and so much about the world and all the wonderful kind of people who live in it, and it's okay.
And last but not least, Arden.
Yeah, so I would tell my younger self and people watching now that really fine not to know exactly everything about yourself, and you don't have to be sure about things. You don't have to have things figured out, and you don't ever have to have things figured out, because often you will find that you think you have it figured out, or you make some progress, but then something else comes up, and it's really okay, because there's a lot of strength in being open to learning new things about yourself, and giving into the pressure of having to have the perfect definition and your perfect 10-year plan, and you have everything figured out, and like have a neat little PowerPoint presentation. It's really not necessary, and it's just going to give you grief if you try to force it out of yourself. And yeah, it's fine to not know things.
I would like to thank you all very much for your time tonight, and thank everybody that's been sending questions, viewing, and watching alongside with, and listening to a talk and helping raise awareness for the trans community in Trans Awareness Week. Sorry, I've got another bit to read. The Trans Support and Community, LGBT Northern Social Group, Northeast Ambulance Service, Report Out, Northeast Against Racism, and a lot of other members from our community are putting together a digital Trans Day of Remembrance, which will be live across Be Trans Support, Northern Pride, and the LGBT Northern Social Group this Friday at 7 p.m, and also on Northern Pride's Facebook. So I hope that you'll all come and show solidarity alongside with for Trans Day of Remembrance this year. And that is all from me. So thank you very much, and trans rights are human rights, as I'm sure everyone on the panel will agree. Bye.
Bye.